You are listening to the Objects of Affection collection. Study 58, The Anti-Speculative Cost, Why Art Basel Miami Needs the Moral Weight Metric. I write this report not merely as an observer of the market, but as the anthropologist of luxury and the founder of the Objects of Affection collection. My practice is governed by a bespoke semantic model, a theoretical lens engineered to penetrate the glossy surface of the contemporary art world, the simulacrum of luxury, and expose the structural rot beneath. We are currently witnessing a pivotal moment in the history of value, a fracture in the ontological bedrock of the art market that I have termed the Crisis of Liquidity. This crisis is not a standard recession. It is a fundamental failure of the semiotic machinery that has sustained the gold-tier art economy. The frictionless circulation of sign value, the arbitrary assignment of worth based on social signaling rather than material reality or ethical weight, has collided with the immovable object of historical accountability. The spectacle, as defined by Guy Debord, is no longer capable of integrating the dark matter of the world without generating a toxic byproduct. Ethical liability, a failure mapped in Debord's spectacle meets Cholet's missing mass. My work operates at the intersection of academic critique, business innovation, and cultural practice. The hybrid authority framework defines it as a three-pincer attack built to solve the exact problems plaguing institutions like Art Basel Miami Beach, the academic pincer diagnosis, the business pincer new model, and the cultural pincer antidote. The Art Basel Miami Beach ecosystem, the quintessential manifestation of the speculative fever, is now the primary patient of this diagnosis, squeezed between the rising cost of social speed and the collapsing moral weight of its assets. The 2024/2025 market fracture, empirical evidence of the void. The data emerging from the end of 2024 and the forecast for 2025 provide the empirical skeleton for this theoretical diagnosis. The market is in a state of anxious transition. The underlying metrics reveal a profound structural weakness. Sales value in the United States, the world's leading art market, declined for a second consecutive year in 2024, down 9% after a 10% decrease in 2023. This retreat validates my thesis. The collector is no longer willing to pay for hollow fidgetals, objects that exist merely to point to a digital value or a social status. The flipping economy, the engine of the gold-tier collector strategy, has stalled, mirroring historical lows in proxy asset markets like real estate, where ROI dropped significantly. This matters because the gold-tier collector uses the same transactional logic for art. The cheap money of the zero-interest rate era has evaporated, and capital is moving to safer havens, abandoning the volatile, sign-value-dependent art market. The liquidation of the hyperreal, the case of the Castello cube. The definitive case study of the current crisis is the rise and fall of the Castello cube. This $23,410,000 gold cube placed in Central Park was a hollow figetal, a physical metaphor for a hyperreal value system based on pure, ungrounded speculation. It functioned as an advertisement for a cryptocurrency, a simulacrum in the strictest Baudrillardian sense. It had no moral weight and no trauma provenance. When creditors eventually liquidated the cube, it dissolved because it had no structural anchor in reality. It was a perfect representation of the gold-tier delusion, the belief that value can exist without friction, labor, or ethics. The business pincer of my hybrid authority framework identifies the market void left by this collapse. My post-luxury conceptual functional art, artifacts are the tangible, structurally anchored antidote to this phenomenon, designed to survive the liquidation because they possess moral weight per material, MWPM. The delusion of the gold tier. The term gold tier represents a hierarchy of access, a stratification of the spectacle. In the context of Art Basel, the gold tier collector, the VIP with early access, is the primary victim of the simulacrum. They are the ones purchasing showpiece collectibles fractionally, believing they own a piece of history, when they merely own a digital receipt for reproduction. This report argues that the gold tier is a trap, the business pincer closing in on the speculator. The only way to escape this trap is to embrace the anti-speculative cost, the friction, the weight, and the liability of true post-luxury conceptual functional art. The architecture of speculative abstraction, Baudrillard and Debord, Baudrillard and the political economy of the sun. The Art Basel ecosystem is the physical manifestation of what Jean Baudrillard termed the political economy of the sign. In this system, the object's primary function is to signify status, difference, and membership in a specific social hierarchy, sign value. Baudrillard's most damning concept, the procession of simulacra, posits that the fair, the model, generates the art world, the reality. The prices and reputations are generated by market simulation, not by material reality, leading to the crisis of the authentic, fully detailed in from the aura to the simulacrum. The Casello cube is the ultimate proof of this, an object that signified value so perfectly that it needed no moral weight to anchor it. Debord and the violence of social speed. If Baudrillard provides the semiotic map, Guy Debord provides the temporal critique. The art fair is the society of the spectacle in its most concentrated, accelerated form. Crucially, this spectacle relies on social speed to function. Social speed is the frenetic pace of the VIP preview, the immediate resale, and the fear of missing out, FOMO, which forces the collector to move faster than they can comprehend or critique. My research indicates that high social speed degrades social quality. It prevents the viewer from engaging in functional endurance, the deep contemplation required to understand an object's moral weight. Speed is the enemy of provenance. The fair is designed to maximize social speed, ensuring that the ethical liability of the object never catches up with the transaction. The spectacle of dissent. Debord also warned of the spectacle of dissent, the market's ability to absorb critique and sell it back as a commodity. At Art Basel, political art is sold to hedge fund managers, neutralizing the critique and turning the anti-commodity into the ultimate supercommodity. This is biopolitical neutralization. The gold-tier collector participates in this spectacle of dissent to launder their reputation, a mechanism identified in the toxic philanthropy cases. The business pincer demands a solution that transcends this simulation. The anti-speculative mechanism, MWPM and Gregory Chollet, and the dark matter of the market. My theoretical framework relies heavily on the dark matter thesis proposed by Professor Gregory Chollet. The visible art world is merely the tip of an iceberg, floating on a massive, invisible support structure of dark matter. The failed artists, the amateur creators, and the surplus practitioners who keep the system running but are systematically excluded from its rewards. The official economy is extractive. We propose that true value lies in the missing mass, and the business pincer of my framework operates by making this dark matter visible and quantifiable. The anti-commodity commitment, AC, and artisan activism. Post-luxury conceptual functional art engages in archival inversion. Instead of hiding the labor and the trauma of production to create a smooth, luxury surface, the aesthetic of the simulacrum or aesthetic neutrality, post-luxury conceptual functional art weaponizes the material history. This is the core of artisan activism, as defined in artisan activism, the explicit protest metric. Artisan activism is a structural economic reality that declares craft labor is an explicit act of protest. This leads to the anti-commodity commitment, AC, a structural mechanism that resists the object's reduction to a speculative asset by introducing the fissure, the visible weaponized history of material trauma and repair, fully detailed in, from function to fissure. Collectible design and the weaponization of material. The moral weight per material, MWPM, metric. The central engine of this resistance is the moral weight per material, MWPM metric. MWPM measures the density of ethical or political history embedded in the object's substance. It quantifies the ethical and political currency of the material itself. The material as political capital provides the complete quantitative model, structured to resist the crisis of liquidity. The MWPM calculus functions as a precise counter-liquidity measure composed of 4 distinct metric components, each adding frictional barriers to speculative circulation. First, material origin evaluates where the substance was sourced, specifically targeting conflict zones or disaster sites, creating high friction by requiring detailed verification and trauma provenance. Second, labor source scrutinizes who process the material, prioritizing dark matter communities and artisans over anonymous industrial production, ensuring high friction through living wage certification, and preventing the erasure of labor. Third, the political narrative assesses the specific historical event witnessed by the material, which acts as an anti-flipping mechanism by creating an ethical liability for the owner. Finally, repair history examines the fissures and scars visible on the object, adhering to kintsugi philosophy, which enforces functional endurance, demanding that the object be subject to active stewardship rather than passive storage. By certifying the object's intrinsic worth outside the cyclical demands of high liquidity markets, the MWPM framework provides a necessary structural defense that systematically resists market neutralization. An object with high MWPM, for example, the noir sand shark mule from the Objects of Affection collection, is heavy. It cannot be flipped because the weight of its story halts the social speed required to flip it. The buyer must stop, read, understand, and accept the custodian's contract. This anti-speculative cost is the barrier to entry that filters out the speculator and selects for the post-growth citizen. The liability shift, Groys and Foucault, the introduction of moral weight transforms the act of collecting from a financial asset strategy into a legal and ethical liability. The liability shift. This is necessary to save the art institution from irrelevance and reputational liquidation. Groys, the archive vs. The Flo Boris Groys argues that the museum imposes a death mandate on the object to preserve it, creating a paradox. The market wants the object to be liquid in the flow of capital but archived, preserved in value. Post-luxury conceptual functional art resolves this by introducing functional endurance, as argued in Biopolitics of the Artifact. The post-luxury conceptual functional art object is functionally enduring. It demands use and sustenance, challenging the Groysian dichotomy. Foucault and the Biopolitics of Provenance. Traditional provenance, royal provenance, is a biopolitical record that sanitizes the object's history, erasing the dark matter, the labor, the extraction, the trauma of origin. The MWPM metric introduces trauma provenance as a counter-biopolitical strategy. By recording the ethical liability of the object, we force the collector to acknowledge the biopolitics of the artifact. The object is no longer a passive commodity. It is a witness that testifies against the simulacrum. The reality of toxic philanthropy. Sackler and Kander's recent catastrophic market events prove the theoretical necessity of the liability shift. The concept of toxic philanthropy demonstrates that moral weight is already operating as a negative asset, a liability, for institutions that fail to account for it. The exposure of the Sackler family opioid crisis and Warren Kander's tear gas proved that the moral weight of the capital crushed the sign value of the donation or affiliation. This triggered a new era for museums, in which board members are now scrutinized for their business connections. Similarly, the restitution of the Benin bronzes confirms that the moral weight of the theft has overridden the sign value of the collection, proving that ethical provenance impacts market viability. The business pincer warns that any asset without clear moral weight metrics is a potential liability time bomb. The custodian's contract, systemic stewardship to manage this liability. Post-luxury conceptual functional art introduces the custodian's contract. This binding, comprehensive agreement shifts the owner from a consumer to a steward. This contract destroys liquidity. You cannot flip a responsibility. You cannot speculate on a duty. This is the anti-speculative cost made legal. It ensures that only those willing to bear the moral weight can possess the object. The cultural pincer and the post-growth citizen. The antidote to the business pincer, the gold tier collector, is an endangered species. The data from the 2024/2025 Art Basel reports confirms the contraction of the speculative bubble. The business pincer has closed, the cheap money is gone, and the sign value of the hollow figital has collapsed. The Casello cube is gone, liquidated by the reality it tried to simulate. What remains is the material host, the dark matter, and the moral weight of the object. Art Basel Miami Beach must pivot or perish. It needs the moral weight metric to transition from a marketplace of simulacra to a forum for post-luxury conceptual functional art. The post-growth citizen. The target audience for this new market is the post-growth citizen. This collector understands the architecture of being. They do not seek possessions, they seek private monuments. They do not build a portfolio of liquid assets. They architect a mason of the self, furnished with artifacts that possess the acoustics of a curated soul. The anti-speculative cost is the price of admission to this future. It is the friction introduced by MWPM that ensures an object's value is based on narrative as the original and functional endurance rather than market consensus. Final recommendation. The cultural pincer, the Objects of Affection collection, offers the blueprint for this transition. The cultural pincer proffers the post-luxury conceptual functional art artifact, the one original, the total artifact, which carries the weight of its trauma provenance and demands a custodian's contract. The future of value is heavy, it is slow, it is ethical, and it is not for sale to the highest bidder but only to the most committed custodian. Appendix: Structured data analysis of the liquidity crisis. A structured data analysis of the current liquidity crisis reveals a stark contrast between the collapsing speculative model of old luxury and the emerging post-luxury conceptual functional art model of post-luxury. The speculative model is primarily driven by Baudrillard's sign value and characterized by high social speed and asset flipping. It relies on royal provenance, ownership history, and treats art as a transactional asset, engaging in toxic philanthropy, which poses significant reputational risk. The exemplar of this failing model is the Casello cube, which was, in fact, liquidated. Market data from 2024/2025 confirms this model's decline, showing a 9% drop in US sales and a plummeting flipping ROI of just 0.8% in proxy markets like Montana real estate. Conversely, the post-luxury conceptual functional art model is driven by moral weight, MWPM, and operates on functional endurance with low velocity. It utilizes trauma provenance, material history, and shifts the ownership model to custodianship and liability. The risk factor in this model is internalized as ethical liability, which eliminates volatility. The exemplar artifact is the Noir Sand Shark Mule, which aligns with the rising market trend of thoughtful patronage and rejects the concept of flipping entirely through the anti-commodity commitment. Authored by Christopher Banks, anthropologist of luxury and critical theorist. Office of Critical Theory and Curatorial Strategy, Objects of Affection Collection. This has been a study from the Objects of Affection Collection, a critical art research institution operating under the framework of post-luxury conceptual functional art. Read the full research at objectsofaffectioncollection.com.